Soaked to the bone and clutching his crying child, he knocked with nothing but hope left in his hands. And she, aching from her own loss, let them in without a word. That night, three broken hearts found shelter in each other, and something like family began to grow. The storm hit the Montana prairie like God's own fury, turning the world into a battlefield of wind and rain. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, illuminating the lonely ranch house that sat like a fortress against the darkness. Inside, Delaney Price sat by her fire, mending a torn shirt with methodical precision. At 42, Delaney had learned that storms passed, seasons changed, but loneliness was the one constant that never left. The ranch had been quiet for 5 years now. Too quiet, some might say. But quiet meant safe, and safe meant she could grieve in peace. Then came the pounding, not the gentle rap of a neighbor seeking shelter, but the desperate hammering of someone running from death itself. Delaney's hand moved to the rifle beside her chair as she approached the heavy wooden door. "Please!" The voice cut through the howling wind, a man's voice broken and pleading. "My baby, she's dying." Delaney hesitated. She'd heard that trick before, outlaws using fake distress to gain entry. But then she heard something that made her blood freeze, the weak, hollow cry of an infant. She opened the door to find a stranger collapsed against her porch rail, soaked to the bone and shivering violently. Rowan Gable looked like he'd been running for days, his clothes torn, his face gaunt with exhaustion, his eyes holding the wild desperation of a cornered animal. But it was the bundle in his arms that made Delaney's heart skip. The baby was tiny, pale as winter snow, with lips that had turned blue. Her cry was weak, the sound of a child fighting to live. "How long has she been out in this weather?" Delaney demanded. "2 days," Rowan gasped, stumbling across the threshold. "Maybe 3. I've lost track. We've been running, and I couldn't find anywhere safe." Delaney guided him to the chair by the fire. Whatever story this man carried, whatever trouble followed him, the baby needed immediate attention. She'd lost enough in her life. She wouldn't watch an innocent child die on her doorstep. As she built up the fire and grabbed blankets, she noticed how Rowan clutched the child even while barely conscious, his body instinctively curling around her like a shield. When he finally collapsed from exhaustion, Delaney found herself holding the baby. The familiar weight stirred something deep in her chest, an ache she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten it existed. "If you thought this was intense, wait until you see what secret he's hiding." Dawn crept through the storm clouds, casting gray light across the ranch house. Delaney had spent the night in her rocking chair, the baby sleeping in her arms while Rowan tossed and turned on the makeshift bed. Even unconscious, his protective instincts were fierce. Every few minutes he'd reach out, searching for the child, his face twisted with panic until his fingers found empty air. Then he'd settle, muttering names and apologies. When Rowan finally woke, his first word was a desperate whisper. "Where is she?" "Safe," Delaney said simply, adjusting the baby in her arms. Fed, clean, and breathing steady. Rowan struggled to sit up, wincing. Up close, Delaney could see he was younger than expected, maybe 30, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "She doesn't have a name," he confessed quietly. "Her mother died giving birth 2 months ago. I kept thinking I'd know what to call her, but—" "And you've been running ever since?" Delaney asked. Rowan nodded. "There are men after us. Bad men who want what they think I'm carrying. They don't care that she's just a baby. To them, she's leverage." Delaney recognized the truth. This man wasn't running from the law. He was running from something worse. "What did you do?" she asked. The baby had latched onto her finger with tiny hands. "I tried to leave that life behind," Rowan said. "When my wife got pregnant, I wanted to go clean, start fresh. But some people don't let you walk away, especially when you know things they'd rather keep buried." The baby began to fuss. Without thinking, Delaney began to rock, humming an old lullaby. The effect was immediate. The child settled, her tiny face relaxing into peaceful sleep. "You're good with her," Rowan observed, wondering in his voice. Delaney shrugged. "Babies are simple. They need food, warmth, and someone who won't let them fall." A quiet bond was forming. She could feel it in the way the baby responded to her touch. It had been 5 years since she'd held her son. "One night," she said firmly. "You can stay one night to rest. Then you move on." But even as she said the words, Delaney knew she was lying. The baby's presence was already working its way into the empty spaces of her heart. The second night brought unexpected revelations. Delaney woke to find her rocking chair empty, and panic shot through her chest. Then she heard voices from the main room, Rowan's low murmur and the soft sounds of the baby being fed. She found him sitting by the dying fire, the child cradled against his chest. In the flickering firelight, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "Couldn't sleep?" Delaney asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Old habits," Rowan said. "In my line of work, sleeping too deep could get you killed." "What was your line of work?" Rowan was quiet for so long that Delaney thought he wouldn't answer. Then, looking into the fire, he began to speak. "I was part of a traveling medicine caravan. Legitimate, mostly. We sold tonics and remedies to frontier towns. But sometimes we'd come across information that certain people found valuable. Routes, supply shipments, who had money and who didn't. You were spies." "We were survivors," Rowan corrected. "But then we crossed the wrong people. An outlaw clan called the Red Creek Boys. They wanted us to gather information on a bank shipment, and when we refused..." He didn't need to finish. Delaney had heard enough frontier justice stories. "My wife was pregnant by then," Rowan continued. "I told the crew I was done, that I wanted to settle down somewhere safe, but the Red Creek Boys didn't see it that way." The baby finished her bottle and Rowan automatically shifted her to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. "I lost my husband and son 5 winters ago," Delaney said suddenly, surprising herself. "Fever took them both within a week. I've been alone ever since." "I'm sorry," Rowan said, and the simple words carried more weight than all the condolences her neighbors had offered. "The hardest part isn't dying," Delaney continued. "It's quiet after. The way the house feels too big. The way your arms feel empty." As if sensing the emotion in the room, the baby stirred and reached toward Delaney with tiny, grasping fingers. Without thinking, Delaney extended her hand, and the child's fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. "She knows," Rowan said softly. "Babies can sense things adults miss. She knows you're safe." In that moment, sitting by the dying fire, Delaney felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years, the possibility of hope. The third morning brought more than just sunrise. It brought evidence that their sanctuary had been discovered. Delaney found the tracks while doing her morning chores, boot prints in the soft earth near the barn that were too large and too fresh to belong to Rowan. Someone had been watching the house. She studied the prints carefully, her old instincts awakening. 3 men, she estimated, based on the different boot sizes. They'd approached from the east using the barn as cover while they observed the house. Delaney's blood ran cold. These weren't random travelers. This was reconnaissance. She didn't tell Rowan immediately. Instead, she spent the morning quietly reinforcing the house's defenses, checking window latches, cleaning her rifle, and counting ammunition. The old routines came back easily, muscle memory from a time when survival had depended on preparation. The Steel Widow, they'd called her during the border conflicts. A name that had once struck fear into the hearts of men who thought women were easy targets. She'd been younger then, angrier, with less to lose. But the skills remained. When Rowan emerged from the house with the baby, Delaney was sitting on the porch, rifle across her knees. "They found us," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tracks by the barn. 3 men, sometime before dawn. You need to take the baby and go. Now, while there's still daylight." "No." The word came out flat and final. Delaney turned to look at him, surprised by the firmness in his voice. "We'll follow us wherever we go," he finished. "How far can we get with a baby?" "At least here. You've got walls, supplies, and defensive positions. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight the moment I knocked on your door," Rowan said, adjusting the baby in his arms. "Besides, that little girl needs milk, and milk comes from a cow. Your cow's staying put." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Delaney felt a flicker of admiration for the man's logic, and something else, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "You know how to use a gun?" she asked. "Well enough. How about a rifle?" "Better than most." Delaney nodded, already formulating plans. Then we'd better get you armed and positioned. As evening approached, they worked together to fortify the ranch house. Delaney's old tactical mind was fully engaged now, calculating angles and distances with precision that had once made her legendary. The baby cooed from her makeshift crib, oblivious to the danger gathering around them. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight they would stand together. They came at dusk, just as Delaney had predicted. 3 riders silhouetted against the dying light, approaching the ranch house with casual confidence. Delaney watched them through her rifle scope, noting their formation, their weapons, the way they held themselves. Professional killers, all of them. Bounty agents, the leader called out as they stopped just beyond rifle range. He was a tall man with a voice like gravel. We're looking for a thief who stole something valuable. Got word he might have passed through here. Delaney stepped onto her porch, rifle held casually but ready. What did he steal? A package, the man replied, his eyes scanning the ranch buildings. Small, valuable. Might be traveling with it disguised as something else. Have you seen any strangers lately? Mister, I haven't seen another living soul in weeks, Delaney lied smoothly. The bounty hunter's gaze lingered on her face, measuring, calculating. Mind if we water our horses? Long ride from town. Well's behind the barn, Delaney said, though every instinct screamed that letting them closer was a mistake. As the men dismounted and led their horses toward the well, Delaney caught subtle details that confirmed her worst fears. None of them had official badges. Their weapons were too expensive for legitimate bounty work, and most telling of all, they'd never once mentioned the thief by name, only referred to what he'd supposedly stolen as the package. They weren't bounty hunters. They were the Red Creek boys, and the package they wanted was sleeping peacefully in a crib inside her house. Nice place you got here, the leader commented, letting his horse drink while his eyes cataloged potential threats. Must get lonely, though, woman alone on a spread this size. I manage, Delaney replied. Sure you do. Strong woman like you probably handles all kinds of situations. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Appreciate the water, the leader said as they remounted. We'll be camping up in the hills tonight, in case that thief decides to show his face. You see anyone matching the description, you just fire 3 shots in the air. Delaney watched them ride away, noting their direction and estimating how long it would take them to circle back under cover of darkness. Inside the house, Rowan was waiting with grim determination. How long do we have? Not long enough, Delaney said, already moving toward her gun cabinet. They're not bounty hunters, they're your Red Creek boys, and they're not planning to take you alive. That night, as they waited in the darkness for the inevitable attack, Rowan made one final plea. Delaney, if something happens to me, I want you to give them the baby. Don't die for... The slap cracked across his face like a gunshot. Don't you ever suggest I hand over that child to save my own skin, Delaney said, her voice deadly quiet. She doesn't need someone to save her. She needs someone to keep her. In the quiet hour before the storm, while they waited for death to come calling, Delaney did something she'd been putting off for 3 days. She gave the baby a name. Junia, she whispered, lifting the child from her makeshift crib. After my grandmother, the toughest woman who ever lived. Rowan looked up from checking his rifle, something shifting in his expression. Junia, he repeated. She looks like a Junia. But there was more to the moment than just choosing a name. Delaney could see it in Rowan's eyes, the recognition that she'd claimed this child in a way that went beyond temporary shelter. There's something else you need to know, Rowan said, about Junia, about why they really want her. Delaney settled into her chair, the baby secure in her arms, and waited. She's not mine, Rowan confessed. Not by blood, anyway. Her real parents were homesteaders named the Clearys, good people who'd claimed land that the Red Creek boys wanted for themselves. The story that followed was brutal in its simplicity. The Clearys had been murdered in their own home, their property seized by men who believed that strength and cruelty were the only laws that mattered. Martha was still alive when I found them, Rowan continued. Barely, but breathing. She begged me to take Junia, to get her somewhere safe. Said the baby was the only good thing left of their family. So you took her and ran. I took her and ran. Been running ever since, trying to stay ahead of men who see her as unfinished business. Delaney looked down at the peaceful baby in her arms, trying to reconcile this innocent child with the violence that had shaped her young life. Blood doesn't make a mother, Delaney said firmly. Love does, and choice does. As if responding to her words, Junia opened her eyes and looked directly at Delaney. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, the baby smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of joy. The smile was followed by something even more precious. Junia reached toward Delaney with both hands, making soft cooing sounds that babies use when they recognize someone they trust completely. She knows, Rowan said, wondering in his voice. She knows you're her mama now. Delaney felt tears she'd held back for 5 years finally break free. Yeah, she whispered, pressing her lips to Junia's forehead. I'm your mama now, little one. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of approaching horses. The Red Creek boys were coming, but they were about to learn something important about mothers, especially mothers who'd already lost everything once. As full darkness settled over the ranch, Delaney disappeared into her bedroom and emerged transformed. Gone was the simple frontier woman who'd offered shelter to strangers. In her place stood someone harder, more dangerous. The Steel Widow was back. Her old gear fit like it had been waiting, a long leather duster, boots with spurs bearing carved initials, and a rifle with more notches on its stock than Rowan could count. Sweet Jesus, he breathed. You're really her, aren't you? The Steel Widow from the Border Wars. Was, Delaney corrected, checking her ammunition. Haven't used that name in 5 years. But some skills don't rust. Rowan had heard the stories. A woman sniper who could drop a man at 800 yards, who'd single-handedly broken a siege at Fort Morrison. Most people assumed the tales were exaggerated. Looking at Delaney now, Rowan realized the stories probably didn't do her justice. Can you handle a rifle? She asked, tossing him a weapon. Well enough. They spent the next hour preparing the house for siege. Delaney moved with efficiency, positioning water buckets, creating shooting positions, establishing clear fields of fire. The baby, Rowan said, nodding toward Junia's crib. Cellar, Delaney replied. There's a chest down there I used to store my son's things. It's thick enough to stop bullets. The cellar was cramped and dusty, but in the far corner sat an old wooden chest, large enough to hold a child and lined with soft fabric. Delaney lifted Junia gently, wrapping her in blankets and settling her into the chest with practiced care. Sleep now, little one, she whispered. Mama's going to handle some business. She placed a silver locket around Junia's neck, inscribed with JP for Junia Price. Whatever happened tonight, this child would carry Delaney's name. Back upstairs, Rowan was making his own preparations. Never killed a man before, he admitted. Hope you don't have to tonight, Delaney replied, taking position at the side window. But if it comes to that, remember, they chose this fight. As if summoned by her words, the first muzzle flash lit up the darkness. The bullet shattered the window above Rowan's head. Stay low, Delaney called, already returning fire with measured precision. Make every shot count. The Steel Widow had returned to war. Meanwhile, Junia has begun crawling around the ranch house, her tiny hands exploring every corner with fearless curiosity. Her innocence contrasts sharply with the dark preparations being made around her, a reminder of what they're really fighting to protect. Delaney carves JP into a locket she finds in her old chest and places it around the baby's neck. The morning after their preparations brought ominous news. While Rowan kept watch over a sleeping Junia, Delaney spotted smoke rising from the direction of the neighboring homestead, thick black columns that spoke of more than cooking fires. They hit the Weatherbees, she said, grabbing her rifle and heading for the barn. Stay with Junia, she ordered. If more of them come while I'm gone, get her to the cellar. The ride to the Weatherby place took 20 minutes, and with each mile the smoke grew thicker. Delaney arrived to find the homestead burning. The main house collapsed into smoldering ruins. She found Marcus Weatherby pinned under a fallen beam, his clothes singed and breathing labored. His wife and children were nowhere to be seen. Steel Widow, Marcus gasped. Thank God. They came right before dawn, said they were looking for a man and baby. When I told them I hadn't seen anyone, he coughed, blood speckling his lips. They killed Sarah, killed my boys. How many, she asked. 7, maybe 8. Led by a man with a scar, called himself Creek. They said they were heading to the Morrison place next. Then the Miller family spread. The full scope became clear. This wasn't just about recovering a baby. This was about sending a message to the entire territory. Tell Morrison. Marcus's voice was fading. Tell him they're coming for the whole valley. By the time Delaney made it back to her ranch, Marcus Weatherby was dead, and she carried with her the knowledge that the war had expanded beyond her property lines. We have to evacuate Junia, Rowan said when she told him what she'd found. No, Delaney said firmly. Running just puts other families in danger. How many more innocents die if we keep leading them from place to place? So what do you suggest? We end it here, tonight. We make our stand and finish this once and for all. As evening approached and they made their final preparations, Delaney knew that everything, their safety, their future, their chance at being a family, would be decided in the hours to come. They came with the full darkness, exactly as Delaney had predicted. Not 3 men this time, but 10. The entire surviving force of the Red Creek Boys approached the ranch house like a military unit, led by the scarred man Marcus Weatherby had called Creek. Earlier that evening, Delaney had moved Junia to the cellar, settling her into the chest that had once held her own son's belongings. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the violence gathering above her head. Remember the plan, Delaney whispered to Rowan. I take the high ground in the loft. You hold the main floor. Whatever happens, they don't get to the cellar. The loft gave Delaney the perfect sniper's nest. Clear sight lines in all directions, elevated position that turned her rifle into an instrument of devastating precision. Below, Rowan crouched behind an overturned table. The first wave came from 3 directions simultaneously. A frontal assault on the main door, a flanking movement toward the barn, and 2 men attempting to breach the back window. But Delaney had anticipated the strategy. Her first shot dropped the leader of the flanking force before he'd made it halfway to the barn. The second punched through the chest of a man trying to climb through the rear window. By the time the echoes faded, 2 of the Red Creek Boys were dead, and the rest had taken cover. Steel Widow! Creek's voice cut through the darkness. We know you're in there. Send out the man and the baby, and maybe we let you live. Delaney's answer was another carefully aimed shot that sent Creek diving for cover. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Red Creek Boys had expected. Every time they tried to advance, Delaney's rifle would bark from the loft, dropping another man or forcing the survivors to retreat. Rowan proved equally effective, his position allowing him to cover the approaches Delaney couldn't see. When 2 outlaws tried to rush the front door, they discovered that desperation and righteous anger could make even an amateur dangerous. The tide turned when Creek, driven by fury, made a desperate gambit. While his remaining men provided covering fire, he circled to the back of the house and managed to set fire to the rear wall. Delaney! Rowan shouted as smoke began filling the main room. They're burning us out! But fire was a double-edged weapon, and Delaney had faced this tactic before. Instead of panicking, she used the smoke as cover, moving through the loft like a ghost, while Creek's men struggled to see their targets. From her new position, she had a clear shot at the arsonist himself. Creek was crouched behind the house, feeding flames with torn boards and thinking himself safe from retaliation. He never saw the muzzle flash that ended his life. With their leader dead and half their number eliminated, the surviving Red Creek Boys broke. Those who could still move fled into the darkness, abandoning their mission and their wounded comrades. As dawn approached, they surveyed the battlefield. 7 bodies lay scattered around the property, testament to what happened when evil men underestimated the fury of a mother protecting her child. It's over, Rowan said, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. No, Delaney corrected, heading toward the cellar where Junia waited. It's just beginning. In the aftermath, 3 surviving outlaws were bound and left for the territorial marshal. Under questioning, they revealed the name of the land baron who'd been paying the Red Creek Boys to clear settlers from their claims, a revelation that would lead to arrests and justice for families like the Clearys and Weatherbys. But for Delaney, the most important victory was simpler. When she lifted Junia from the cellar chest, the baby reached for her with perfect trust, unarmed and unafraid. Spring returned to Montana territory with news that changed everything. Rowan rode back from town with a letter from the territorial capital. The land baron behind the Red Creek boys had been arrested, his network dismantled. "We're free," he told Delaney as she worked in her garden. "Truly free. No more running." But freedom meant more than just the absence of pursuit. It meant the chance to build something lasting from the ashes of violence and loss. The ranch had become a different place since the final battle. Neighbors who'd once given Delaney a wide berth now sought her out, not for her reputation as the Steel Widow, but for her steady presence. Word had spread that she was teaching young women to shoot and defend themselves. "Mrs. Price," called Sarah Morton, one of her newest students, "my pa says to ask if you'll train my younger sister too." "Bring her by next week," Delaney replied, adjusting baby Junia in the sling across her chest. "Any man who wants his daughters protected is welcome at my table." It was a strange transformation, from feared sniper to respected teacher, from isolated widow to the center of a community of strong women. The biggest change was Junia herself. At 8 months old, she was a happy, healthy baby who had been crawling around the ranch house for weeks, exploring every corner with fearless curiosity. Ma," she said suddenly, reaching up toward Delaney with pudgy fingers. It was her first clear word, and it hit Delaney like a physical blow. She'd been mama in action for months, but hearing it spoken aloud made something finally click into place. "Did you hear that?" Rowan asked, grinning as he approached from the barn. "She called you mama." "She did," Delaney whispered, lifting Junia from her sling and spinning her around until the baby laughed with pure joy. Rowan had found his own place in their unconventional family. He'd proven invaluable around the ranch, but more than that, he'd become the closest thing to a father that Junia had ever known. Patient, gentle, and fiercely protective. "I've been thinking," he said that evening as they sat on the porch, watching sunset paint the sky, "about staying, permanently if you'll have me." Delaney rocked Junia gently, considering the offer. A year ago, she would have refused automatically. But Rowan had proven himself in ways that went beyond words. "The three of us work well together," she said finally. "And Junia needs stability," Rowan added. "Needs to know that the people who love her aren't going anywhere." Delaney looked down at the baby in her arms. This child who'd come through tragedy but brought the possibility of joy. Junia's eyes were closing, her tiny fist wrapped around the locket bearing her initials. JP for Junia Price, daughter of her heart. "You weren't just looking for shelter that night," Delaney said softly. "You were looking for home." "So were you," he replied. "You just didn't know it yet." As darkness settled over the ranch, Delaney felt complete peace. The Steel Widow was gone, replaced by something better. A mother, teacher, and woman who'd learned that the strongest families were built from choice, commitment, and love. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video,